The stagecoach rattled to a stop in front of the Grand Hotel in Ordway, Colorado, and Zelda Zimmerman stepped down into the dust with her silk skirts billowing around her ankles, already regretting every single decision that had brought her to this God-forsaken corner of the territory in the summer of 1878. Her father's telegram had been clear. Marry Harrison Caldwell or be cut off without a penny. She had chosen the latter, though standing in the oppressive heat of this cattle town, she wondered if pride was truly worth the price of comfort. The hotel clerk eyed her expensive luggage with undisguised interest, probably calculating how much he could charge a woman whose clothes screamed Boston money. Zelda handed him a few coins and took the key to her room, climbing the narrow stairs with her back straight despite the exhaustion that pulled at her bones. She had been traveling for 2 weeks, each mile taking her further from the life she had known and closer to something she could not yet name. All she knew was that she could not marry Harrison, a man 30 years her senior who looked at her like a prize mare, and she could not live another day under her father's controlling thumb. Her room overlooked the main street, such as it was. A saloon, a general store, a blacksmith, a small church with peeling white paint. Beyond the town, the prairie stretched endlessly, golden and shimmering in the heat. Zelda pressed her forehead against the warm glass and tried not to think about the comfortable mansion she had left behind, the servants who had catered to her every whim, the parties where she had danced in gowns that cost more than most families earned in a year. That evening she counted the money in her reticule, enough for perhaps 2 months if she was careful, less if she was not. She had never been careful with money because she had never needed to be. The reality of her situation settled over her like a shroud. She would need to find work, though she had no idea what kind of work a woman like her could do in a place like this. She could read and write and speak passable French. She could play the piano and embroider and manage a household staff. None of these skills seemed particularly useful in Ordway, Colorado. The next morning, she walked the length of the town's main street, her parasol shading her from the brutal sun. Men stared at her openly, taking in her fine clothes and cultured bearing. She stopped at the general store, where a tired-looking woman stood behind the counter. "I am looking for work," Zelda said, lifting her chin. "Do you know of anyone who might be hiring?" The woman looked her up and down with barely concealed skepticism. "What kind of work can you do?" "I can keep accounts, I can read and write, I am educated and capable." "Can you cook, clean, sew?" Zelda hesitated. "I can learn." The woman snorted. "Most folks around here need workers who already know what they are doing. You might try the widow Hartley. She runs a boarding house on the edge of town and sometimes takes on help. Though I will warn you, she does not pay much, and she works her girls hard." Zelda thanked her and made her way to the boarding house, a sagging 2-story structure that looked like it might collapse in a strong wind. The widow Hartley herself answered the door, a formidable woman with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. "I do not need help," she said before Zelda could even speak. "And if I did, I would not hire some fancy lady who has probably never done a day's work in her life." "Please," Zelda said, and hated the desperation in her voice. "I need employment. I will work hard. I will do whatever you require." The widow studied her for a long moment. "Can you handle a mop?" "Yes." "Can you wash sheets and hang them to dry?" "Yes." "Can you serve meals to rough men without fainting or crying?" Zelda thought of her father's dinner parties, the way she had smiled and made polite conversation with men who bored her to tears. "Yes." "Fine. Room and board plus $2 a week. You start tomorrow at dawn." It was less than Zelda had spent on a single pair of gloves, but she nodded and shook the widow's calloused hand. That night, she moved her belongings from the hotel to a tiny room on the second floor of the boarding house, barely large enough for a narrow bed and a washstand. She lay awake listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the frontier night and wondered what Harrison Caldwell was doing now. Probably sitting in her father's study, smoking cigars, and discussing what a foolish, ungrateful girl she was. The work at the boarding house was backbreaking. Zelda woke before sunrise to help prepare breakfast for a dozen men who worked at the local ranches and farms. She scrubbed floors until her hands blistered, hauled water from the well until her shoulders ached, washed sheets that seemed to multiply overnight. The widow Hartley was not cruel, but she was exacting, and she had no patience for weakness or complaint. By the end of the first week, Zelda's silk dresses hung unused in the narrow wardrobe, replaced by simple cotton garments that could withstand the constant washing and wear. She learned the names and faces of the boarders, rough men who treated her with a mixture of respect and curiosity. They were cowhands and ranch workers, men who spent their days under the burning sun and their nights in the saloon. Most of them were kind enough, though their language was often coarse and their manners non-existent by Boston standards. Zelda served them their meals and cleaned up after them, and tried not to think about how far she had fallen. It was on a Wednesday morning, 3 weeks after her arrival in Ordway, that Quincy Bradford rode into town. Zelda was hanging sheets on the line behind the boarding house when she heard the sound of hoofbeats and looked up to see a man on a dusty gray horse. He dismounted outside the boarding house and tied his horse to the rail, moving with the easy grace of someone who had spent his entire life in the saddle. He was tall and lean, with sun-darkened skin and hair the color of wheat. When he turned toward the house, she saw that his eyes were a startling blue, the color of the Colorado sky. "Morning," he said, tipping his hat. His voice was low and rough, weathered like old leather. "Good morning," Zelda replied, suddenly conscious of her damp hair and work-worn hands. "Are you looking for a room?" Heard the widow Hartley might have space. "I am looking for work in the area and need a place to stay. I will fetch her for you." The widow Hartley was delighted to have another paying customer, and within the hour, Quincy Bradford had moved his few belongings into a room on the first floor. Zelda learned over the course of the next few days that he was a cowboy, a drifter who moved from ranch to ranch, hiring on for seasonal work. He had grown up in Texas, orphaned young, and had been working cattle since he was 14 years old. He owned nothing but his horse, his saddle, and the clothes on his back. He was 24 years old, only 3 years older than Zelda herself. He was also the most intriguing man she had ever met. Unlike the other boarders, who barely acknowledged her existence beyond grunted thanks for their meals, Quincy spoke to her like a human being. He asked about her day, noticed when she was tired, helped carry the heavy water buckets without being asked. He had a quiet intelligence and a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh when she had forgotten that laughter was possible. "You are not from around here," he said one evening as she was clearing away the supper dishes. The other men had gone off to the saloon, leaving the two of them alone in the dining room. "Is it that obvious, your accent, the way you hold yourself? You come from money." Zelda stopped, a stack of plates balanced in her hands. "I did once, not anymore." "What happened?" She could have lied, could have invented some tragic story about a deceased father or lost fortune, but something in his steady blue gaze made her want to tell the truth. "I ran away. My father wanted me to marry a man I did not love, could not love, so I refused and came west." Quincy leaned back in his chair, studying her. "That took courage, or stupidity. Most days I am not sure which." "Courage," he said firmly. "Plenty of people stay in situations that make them miserable because it is easier than being brave. You chose the hard road. That counts for something." His words warmed something inside her that had been cold since she left Boston. She smiled at him, a real smile, and saw an answering warmth in his eyes. "Thank you." As the summer days lengthened and deepened, Zelda found herself looking forward to the moment she could talk with Quincy. He found work at a ranch 10 miles outside of town, but he came back to the boarding house every evening, and they fell into the habit of sitting on the porch after supper, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. He told her stories about his life on the trail, about storms that came out of nowhere and stampedes that could kill a man in seconds. She told him about Boston, about the suffocating expectations and the gilded cage of her former life. "You miss it?" he asked one night. "The money, the comfort?" Zelda considered the question honestly. "Sometimes. I miss hot baths and soft beds. I miss books and music. But I do not miss feeling like a possession, something to be bought and sold. Here, at least, I am free." "Freedom is worth more than gold," Quincy said quietly. "I've never had much of anything, but I have always been free. Could not imagine living any other way." She looked at him in the gathering darkness, at the strong lines of his face and the gentle strength in his hands. "You are rich in ways that matter." He met her eyes and something passed between them, a current of understanding and attraction that made her breath catch. For a moment, she thought he might reach for her hand, but then the widow Hartley called from inside, and the moment broke. Zelda went back to her work with her heart beating faster than it should. The widow Hartley was not blind. A few days later, as Zelda was kneading bread dough in the kitchen, the older woman spoke without preamble. "That cowboy is sweet on you." Zelda felt her cheeks heat. "I do not know what you mean. Do not play coy with me, girl. I have eyes, and you are sweet on him too, unless I miss my guess." "He is a good man," Zelda said carefully. "He is a drifter with nothing to his name. You could do better." "Could I?" Zelda stopped kneading and looked at the widow directly. "I came here with money and fine clothes and nothing else that mattered. Quincy has kindness and integrity and a good heart. In my experience, those qualities are far rarer than money." The widow Hartley harumphed but did not argue further. That evening, she made a point of sending Zelda to the root cellar for supplies at the same time Quincy was coming in from the barn, ensuring they would cross paths in the dim coolness below the house. Zelda suspected the widow was playing matchmaker, and she could not bring herself to mind. "Need help carrying anything?" Quincy asked, his voice echoing slightly in the enclosed space. "I can manage, but thank you." He stepped closer, and in the dim light filtering down from above, his eyes were dark and serious. "Zelda, I need to tell you something." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "What is it?" "I am no good at pretty words. Never had much education, and I am just a cowboy who probably does not have any business even talking to a woman like you. But I think about you all the time. When I am out working the range, when I am lying in bed at night, when I wake up in the morning. You are the first thing I think about and the last thing before I sleep. And I know I have got nothing to offer you. No land, no house, no security. Just a horse and a saddle and whatever wages I can earn. But I have got love, more love than I knew a man could feel. And if you will have me, I will spend every day of my life trying to make you happy." Zelda stood frozen, her hands clutching a jar of preserves. Her entire world had narrowed to this moment, to this man and his honest, earnest declaration. She thought of Harrison Caldwell with his mansion and his money and his cold, appraising eyes. She thought of her father's rage when she had refused the match. She thought of the life she had left behind, the wealth and privilege and emptiness of it all. "Quincy," she whispered, "you have everything that matters." He closed the distance between them in 2 strides and cupped her face in his calloused hands. When he kissed her, it was gentle and sweet and full of promise. Zelda dropped the jar of preserves and heard it shatter on the dirt floor, but she did not care. She wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back, pouring all of her hope and fear and love into that single perfect moment. They stood in the root cellar for a long time, holding each other, speaking in low voices about the future they might build together. Quincy told her that he had been saving his wages, that he had nearly enough to lease a small piece of land and start his own ranch. It would not be much at first, just a few head of cattle and a modest house, but it would be theirs. Zelda told him that she did not care about the size of the house or the amount of land. She cared about waking up beside him every morning and building a life based on love rather than obligation. When they finally emerged from the cellar, the widow Hartley took one look at their faces and smiled. "About time," she said gruffly. "I was starting to think you two were blind and stupid." They were married 3 weeks later in the small church with the peeling paint. The ceremony was simple, attended by the widow and a handful of townspeople who had come to know and respect Zelda, despite her unusual circumstances. She wore a simple white dress that she had sewn herself, and Quincy wore his cleanest shirt and a new hat he had purchased for the occasion. The preacher pronounced them man and wife, and when Quincy kissed her, Zelda felt a joy so pure and complete that she wanted to laugh and cry at the same time. They spent their wedding night in Quincy's room at the boarding house, which felt both awkward and wonderful. Quincy was gentle and patient, and Zelda discovered that love could make even the smallest, shabbiest room feel like a palace. Afterward, they lay tangled in the narrow bed, talking about their dreams and plans. Quincy had found a piece of land 15 miles south of Ordway, near the Arkansas River. The owner was willing to lease it for a fair price, and Quincy believed he could make a go of it with hard work and determination. "It will be difficult," he warned her. "Harder than anything you have done so far. Ranch life is brutal, especially when you are just starting out. Long days, hard work, and no guarantee of success." "I am not afraid of hard work," Zelda said, tracing the line of his jaw with her fingertips. "I have scrubbed floors and hauled water and done 100 things I never imagined I would do. I can learn to be a rancher's wife." "You are amazing," Quincy said, pulling her close. "I do not know what I did to deserve you, but I am going to spend the rest of my life being grateful." They moved to the ranch a week later, after saying goodbye to the widow Hartley, who pressed a jar of preserves and a hand-stitched quilt into Zelda's hands and told her to write if she needed anything. The land Quincy had leased was beautiful in a stark, unforgiving way. The house was little more than a cabin, 2 rooms with a dirt floor and a leaky roof, but Zelda saw its potential. She saw curtains in the windows and a garden in the yard and children playing in the sunshine. The first months were every bit as difficult as Quincy had warned. They woke before dawn and worked until after dark, mending fences and tending the small herd of cattle Quincy had purchased with his savings. Zelda learned to milk cows and churn butter, to tend a vegetable garden and preserve food for the winter. Her hands, which had once been soft and pale, became brown and calloused. Her back ached constantly, and she fell into bed each night too exhausted to do anything but sleep. But she had never been happier. There was something profoundly satisfying about the work, about creating something from nothing through sheer determination and effort. And there was Quincy, always beside her, encouraging her when she was discouraged, celebrating small victories, making her laugh even when things were difficult. They were building a life together, a real life based on partnership and mutual respect and love. The first winter was hard. The temperatures dropped well below freezing, and snow piled up in drifts against the cabin walls. Quincy spent long hours outside, breaking ice in the water troughs and making sure the cattle had enough feed. Zelda kept the fire burning and cooked hearty meals to keep their strength up. They slept curled together under the widow's quilt, sharing warmth and whispered conversations in the darkness. "Do you regret it?" Quincy asked one particularly brutal night when the wind howled outside and the fire struggled to keep the cold at bay. "Leaving Boston, marrying me." Zelda raised herself on one elbow and looked down at him in the firelight. "How can you even ask that? I have never been more certain of anything in my life. You could have had so much more: comfort, security, a fine house. I have everything I need right here. I have you, I have a home, I have a purpose. The girl I was in Boston would not have survived this winter, would not have even tried. But you saw something in me that I did not see in myself. You saw that I was strong and capable and brave. You gave me the chance to become the person I was meant to be. How could I possibly regret that?" Quincy pulled her down and kissed her deeply. "I love you so much it scares me sometimes. Like maybe I am going to wake up and find out this was all a dream." "It is real," Zelda promised. "We are real, and we are going to make this work no matter what." Spring came eventually, as it always does, bringing with it new grass and newborn calves. The ranch began to show signs of real promise. Quincy was a skilled cattleman, and the herd grew steadily. They were able to sell several head at market, and the money allowed them to make improvements to the cabin. Quincy repaired the roof and installed a proper wooden floor. Zelda sewed curtains and planted flowers around the doorway. It was starting to look like a real home. In late summer, Zelda realized she was pregnant. She told Quincy one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the prairie. For a moment he was silent, and then he let out a whoop of joy that startled the horses in the corral. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing and crying at the same time. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, as if he could not quite believe it. "We are going to be parents." "Are you happy?" Zelda asked, though she could see the answer written plainly on his face. "Happy does not even begin to cover it. This is the best day of my life. Well, second best. Marrying you was the first. The pregnancy was not easy." Morning sickness plagued Zelda for months, and the hard work of ranch life did not stop just because she was carrying a child. But Quincy was attentive and protective, taking on extra tasks so she could rest more. He rubbed her swollen feet in the evenings and built a cradle from smooth pine wood. The widow Hartley came to visit and brought baby clothes and advice, much of which Zelda ignored but appreciated nonetheless. Their son was born on a cold February morning in 1880, after 14 hours of labor that left Zelda exhausted but exhilarated. Quincy held the tiny, red-faced baby with trembling hands, tears streaming down his face. They named him Thomas, after Quincy's father, whom he had barely known but always remembered. Life with a baby was chaotic and overwhelming and wonderful. Zelda discovered reserves of strength and patience she had not known she possessed. She learned to nurse Thomas while cooking dinner, to calm his cries in the middle of the night, to find joy in his toothless smiles and gurgling laughs. Quincy was a devoted father, singing to Thomas in his rough voice and carrying him around the ranch in a sling Zelda had fashioned from old fabric. The ranch continued to prosper. By the time Thomas was 2 years old, they had enough money saved to purchase the land outright rather than leasing it. Quincy also bought additional acreage, expanding their holdings and their herd. They hired a young cowhand named Michael to help with the work, giving Quincy more time to spend with his family. Zelda started a small business selling eggs and butter to families in Ordway, supplementing their income and giving her a sense of independence she cherished. One afternoon in the spring of 1882, a fancy carriage rolled up to their ranch house. Zelda was in the garden, her skirts muddy and Thomas playing at her feet, when she looked up and saw her father stepping down from the carriage. She had not seen or heard from him in 4 years, and the sight of him brought a complicated mix of emotions rushing to the surface. "Zelda," he said, and his voice was older, softer than she remembered. "I have been looking for you." She stood slowly, wiping her hands on her apron. "How did you find me?" "I hired investigators. It took time, but I never stopped searching." He looked around at the modest ranch house, the corral, the grazing cattle. His gaze lingered on Thomas, who was staring at this strange man with wide, curious eyes. "Is this your child?" "Yes. His name is Thomas Bradford." Her father flinched at the surname, the confirmation that she had married someone else. "I came to ask you to come home. Your mother misses you terribly. I miss you. We can put all of this unpleasantness behind us and go back to the way things were." Zelda picked up Thomas and held him close. "What about my husband, my son, my life here?" "I am prepared to offer your husband a substantial sum to end the marriage quietly. You and the boy can return to Boston. We will tell people you were widowed out west. No one needs to know the truth." The audacity of it took her breath away. "You think you can buy my husband, buy my life back like it is some kind of transaction?" "I am trying to help you," her father said, and he sounded genuinely bewildered. "Look at how you are living. You are working like a common laborer, living in a shack, raising a child in the middle of nowhere. You deserve better than this." "You are wrong," Zelda said quietly. "I deserve exactly this. I deserve a husband who loves me, a child I adore, work that fulfills me, and freedom to make my own choices. What I did not deserve was to be treated like property, married off to the highest bidder without regard for my own wishes or happiness." "Harrison Caldwell is dead," her father said abruptly. "Heart attack last year. So that particular obstacle is removed if that was your concern." "It was never about Harrison specifically. It was about the fact that you never once asked me what I wanted. You never considered that I might have my own dreams and desires. You just assumed that I would do as I was told, like a good little doll." Her father was quiet for a long moment, staring at her. Finally, he said, "You have changed. I have grown up. I have become the person I was always meant to be." At that moment, Quincy rode up on his horse, alerted by Michael that there was a stranger at the house. He dismounted quickly and came to stand beside Zelda, one hand resting protectively on her shoulder. "Is everything all right, Quincy? This is my father, Edwin Zimmerman. Father, this is my husband, Quincy Bradford." The two men sized each other up. Edwin saw a sun-weathered cowboy with calloused hands and honest eyes. Quincy saw an aging man in expensive clothes whose face showed the ravages of guilt and regret. "I was just telling my father that we will not be returning to Boston," Zelda said firmly. Edwin looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and saw the happiness that radiated from her despite the mud on her skirts and the work-roughened hands. He saw the way she leaned into her husband's touch, the way her face softened when she looked at her son. He saw a woman who had found exactly what she needed, even if it looked nothing like what he had imagined for her. "Are you happy?" he asked, and his voice cracked slightly. "I am happier than I ever dreamed possible." Edwin nodded slowly. "Then I suppose I must accept that. It is not what I wanted for you, but perhaps my wants were never the point." He reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope. "Your mother wanted me to give you this. It is a letter, and there is also a bank draft. Not to buy you back," he added quickly, seeing Zelda's expression, "but because you are my daughter and I want to know that you are provided for. Use it or do not use it, the choice is yours." Zelda took the envelope with trembling fingers. "Thank you." Edwin climbed back into his carriage, then paused and looked back. "If you ever need anything, if you ever change your mind, the door is open. You will always be my daughter no matter what." "I know," Zelda said softly. Goodbye, Father." They watched the carriage roll away down the long dirt road. Quincy pulled Zelda close, Thomas nestled between them. "Are you all right?" "I am perfect," she said, and meant it. "I have everything I need right here." Later that evening, after Thomas was asleep, Zelda opened her mother's letter. It was full of love and longing, and her mother's elegant handwriting blurred as Zelda's eyes filled with tears. The bank draft was for a substantial sum, more money than they would earn in 5 years of ranching. Zelda showed it to Quincy, who whistled low under his breath. "That is a fortune," he said. "We could build a new house, buy more land, hire more help. We could make this ranch into something really significant." "What do you want to do with it?" Zelda asked. Quincy thought for a moment, then smiled. "Whatever you want. It is your money from your family. I have no claim to it." "Everything I have is yours," Zelda said. "We are partners, remember. Equal in all things." They decided to use part of the money to expand the ranch significantly, purchasing adjoining land and building a larger house with multiple bedrooms and modern conveniences like glass windows and a proper kitchen. They also set aside a substantial sum for Thomas's future, for his education and whatever opportunities he might want to pursue. The rest they saved, providing a security net that allowed them to weather bad years without the constant fear of losing everything. The new house was completed in the summer of 1883, a beautiful 2-story structure with a wide porch and a view of the prairie that stretched for miles. Zelda planted a garden and hung the widow's quilt in the bedroom she shared with Quincy. Thomas had his own room, painted blue and filled with toys that Quincy carved from wood in the evenings. It was more than Zelda had dreamed possible when she first stepped off that stagecoach in Ordway, dusty and uncertain and afraid. Their second child, a daughter named Sarah, was born in the spring of 1884. She had Quincy's blue eyes and Zelda's dark hair, and she was a calm, happy baby who rarely cried. Thomas adored his little sister, always wanting to help care for her and make her laugh. Watching them together, Zelda felt a contentment so deep it almost frightened her. This was what she had been searching for, even when she had not known what she was searching for. A family built on love, a home created through hard work and determination, a life that was entirely her own. Quincy thrived as the ranch grew. He was a natural leader, fair with his workers and skilled with the cattle. Other ranchers began to seek his advice, respecting his knowledge and integrity. He and Zelda became pillars of the small community, hosting gatherings and helping neighbors in times of need. Zelda taught Sunday school at the little church and organized fundraisers for families who had fallen on hard times. She never forgot what it felt like to be desperate and alone, and she made sure that no one in their community had to face such hardship without support. In the evenings, after the children were asleep, Quincy and Zelda would sit on the porch and watch the stars emerge in the vast Colorado sky. Sometimes they talked about the early days, laughing about how naive they had been, how certain that love alone would be enough. It had been enough, but it had also been more complicated and difficult and rewarding than either of them could have imagined. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had married Harrison Caldwell?" Quincy asked one night. Zelda shuddered dramatically. "I would have been miserable, trapped in a loveless marriage, living a lie for the rest of my life. I probably would have withered away into one of those bitter society women who finds fault with everything because she is so unhappy inside. I would have kept drifting," Quincy said quietly. "Moving from ranch to ranch, never putting down roots, never knowing what it feels like to have a real home. You saved me, Zelda. Gave me something to work for, someone to be better for." "We saved each other," Zelda corrected, reaching for his hand. "That is what love does." It makes us braver and stronger than we ever could be alone. Their third child, another son named William, was born in 1887. He was a loud, energetic baby who seemed determined to make his presence known at all times. The house was full of noise and laughter and the organized chaos of a growing family. Quincy expanded the ranch operations to include horse breeding, a venture that proved highly profitable. Zelda continued her egg and butter business, but she also began writing articles for a Denver newspaper about life on the frontier, sharing her unique perspective as an educated Eastern woman who had embraced ranch life. The years passed in a blur of seasons and milestones. Thomas learned to ride and rope, spending hours with his father learning the family business. Sarah proved to have a gift for music, and Zelda taught her to play on a piano they had shipped from Denver at considerable expense. William was fearless and adventurous, constantly getting into trouble and driving his parents to distraction. The ranch prospered, weathering droughts and harsh winters and the occasional cattle disease. Quincy and Zelda's partnership deepened with each passing year, their love maturing into something rich and unshakable. In 1890, Zelda received word that her father had died. She took the train to Boston for the funeral, bringing Thomas and Sarah with her so they could meet their grandmother. It was strange being back in the city where she had grown up, walking streets that felt both familiar and foreign. Her mother had aged considerably, her hair completely white and her face lined with grief. But she embraced Zelda tightly and wept over her grandchildren, clearly treasuring this connection to the daughter she had lost. "He was proud of you in the end," her mother said as they sat in the parlor of the mansion that no longer felt like home. "He never admitted it directly, but he followed your newspaper articles. He kept clippings in his desk drawer. He told people that his daughter was a pioneer in Colorado, building something meaningful with her own two hands." Zelda felt tears sting her eyes. "I wish he had told me." Pride was always his weakness, but he loved you. Never doubt that. Zelda returned to Colorado with a sense of closure and peace. She had made the right choice all those years ago, stepping off that stagecoach into an uncertain future. Every hardship, every moment of doubt, every challenge overcome had led her to this life, this family, this bone-deep satisfaction of knowing she was exactly where she was meant to be. Her mother visited the following summer, traveling west with a companion and staying for 3 months. At first, she was appalled by the rustic conditions and the lack of servants, but gradually she began to appreciate the beauty of the prairie and the warmth of the community. She doted on her grandchildren and developed a surprising friendship with the widow Hartley, who came for dinner regularly. When it was time for her to return to Boston, she hugged Zelda tightly and whispered, "You were right to choose this. He is a good man and you are happy. That is all a mother can truly want for her child." After her mother's return to Boston, Zelda felt a completeness she had not realized was missing. All the broken pieces of her life had been gathered up and made whole. She had not abandoned her family. She had simply claimed the right to choose her own path. And her family, eventually, had found a way to accept and even celebrate that choice. The ranch continued to expand and evolve. By the mid-1890s, it was one of the most successful operations in the region, employing a dozen hands and running several hundred head of cattle. Quincy was recognized as one of the leading ranchers in Colorado, and he served on various cattlemen's associations and advisory boards. Zelda became known for her writing and her advocacy for women's education and property rights. They were respected and admired, but they never forgot their humble beginnings or the struggles that had shaped them. Thomas grew into a strong, capable young man who took after his father in temperament and skill. He went away to college in Denver, studying agricultural science and business, but he always knew he would return to the ranch. Sarah developed into a talented musician and teacher, eventually opening a small music school in Ordway where she taught children from surrounding farms and ranches. William remained the wild one, full of energy and big dreams, but he had his father's integrity and his mother's determination. In 1899, Quincy and Zelda celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary. Their children arranged a surprise party, inviting friends and neighbors from across the region. The house was filled with people and laughter and love. Standing in the middle of the crowded parlor, Zelda looked around at the life they had built and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Quincy found her later, standing on the porch looking out at the prairie lit by the setting sun. He wrapped his arms around her from behind and rested his chin on her shoulder. "Happy anniversary." 20 years, Zelda marveled. "It feels like yesterday and forever ago all at once." "I would do it all again," Quincy said. "Every hard day, every struggle, every moment of uncertainty. All of it was worth it to end up here with you." "You once told me that you had nothing to offer but love," Zelda said, turning in his arms to face him. "But you gave me everything. You gave me freedom and partnership and respect. You gave me children and a home and a purpose. You gave me the courage to become who I was always meant to be. That is worth more than all the money in the world." "And you," Quincy said, cupping her face in his hands, "gave me a reason to stop drifting. You gave me roots and meaning and joy. You took a chance on a poor cowboy who had nothing but a horse and a dream. I will love you until the day I die and beyond." They kissed as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold. Inside the house, their children were laughing and their friends were celebrating. But for this moment, it was just the two of them. Two people who had chosen each other against all odds and built something beautiful from nothing. As the new century dawned, the Bradford Ranch stood as a testament to what could be achieved through love and hard work and unwavering determination. Zelda Bradford, who had once been Zelda Zimmerman of Boston, looked back on her life with no regrets. She had walked away from money to find true love, and she had found it in the arms of a cowboy who had nothing to offer but his heart. It had been more than enough. It had been everything. Thomas took over more of the day-to-day operations of the ranch as Quincy began to slow down in his 50s. But Quincy was far from retired, still riding out most mornings to check on the herd and mentor the younger cowboys. He loved the work as much as ever, and he loved coming home to Zelda at the end of each day. They had grown old together gracefully, their hair graying and their bodies softening, but their love had only deepened with time. Sarah married a music teacher from Denver in 1902, a kind man named David who appreciated her talents and supported her work. They moved to Ordway permanently, building a house near the school and starting a family of their own. William went to Montana to work on a large cattle operation, learning the business from a different perspective, before eventually returning home to partner with Thomas in expanding the family enterprise. Zelda's mother died peacefully in her sleep in 1903, and Zelda traveled to Boston one last time for the funeral. The mansion was sold, and Zelda used her inheritance to establish a scholarship fund for young women seeking education beyond primary school. It seemed fitting, a way to honor both her mother's memory and the importance of education and opportunity for women. The years continued their steady march. Grandchildren arrived, filling the big house with new generations of laughter and love. Quincy taught them to ride and rope, just as he had taught their parents. Zelda read to them and told them stories about the old days, about how she had come west with nothing but courage and found everything she needed. The children listened with wide eyes, barely able to imagine their proper, dignified grandmother as a young woman scrubbing floors in a boarding house. In 1908, Ordway celebrated its 50th anniversary, and the town honored Quincy and Zelda as pioneers who had helped shape the community. They stood together on a makeshift stage in front of the church, holding hands, as the mayor recounted their contributions. Afterward, old friends gathered to reminisce about the early days when the town was barely more than a handful of buildings, and the future was uncertain. "We have been blessed," Quincy said that night as they prepared for bed. "More blessed than I ever dreamed possible." "We made our own blessings," Zelda replied, brushing out her long gray hair. "We worked for them, fought for them, built them with our own hands. That makes them even more precious." As they lay in bed, the house quiet around them, Quincy reached for Zelda's hand in the darkness. "I hope I go first," he said quietly. "Quincy, I mean it. I cannot imagine this world without you in it. I do not want to know what that feels like." "Then we will just have to go together," Zelda said firmly. "In our sleep when we are very old, holding hands just like this. Promise, promise." They did not, of course, because life rarely grants such neat endings. But they did have many more years together. Years filled with the simple pleasures of long marriage and family and purposeful work. They watched their children become successful, competent adults who honored the values they had been taught. They delighted in their grandchildren and, eventually, their great-grandchildren. They continued to work side by side on the ranch, adjusting their roles as their bodies aged, but never losing the fundamental partnership that had always defined their relationship. Quincy died in the spring of 1920 at the age of 66. He had been out riding fence lines, doing what he loved, when his heart simply gave out. He was gone before he hit the ground, the doctor said, no pain or suffering. It was the kind of death many men would envy, active and purposeful right to the end. But Zelda, who had shared 42 years of marriage with him, felt like half of her soul had been torn away. The grief was staggering. She had known it would come eventually, had tried to prepare herself, but there was no preparing for the loss of your other half. The ranch felt empty without his presence, the house too quiet without his voice. She went through the motions of living, caring for her grandchildren and managing household tasks, but everything felt muted and colorless. Thomas found her one evening sitting on the porch, staring out at the prairie where Quincy had loved to ride. "Mom," he said gently, sitting beside her. "You need to eat something. Sarah made your favorite stew. I am not hungry. Dad would not want you to stop living just because he is gone." Zelda turned to look at her son, seeing so much of Quincy in his face that it made her heart ache. "I know. But knowing and feeling are two different things." "Tell me about how you met," Thomas said. "The real story, all the details." So Zelda did. She told him about arriving in Ordway with nothing but pride and determination, about working herself to exhaustion at the boarding house, about the day Quincy rode into town on his gray horse. She told him about falling in love in a root cellar, about the early struggles on the ranch, about building a life from nothing but love and hard work. As she talked, she felt the memories warm her, reminding her that what she had lost was real and precious and worth the pain of losing. "He gave me everything," she said finally, tears streaming down her face. "And I gave him everything in return. Not many people can say they had that kind of love." "You are lucky," Thomas agreed, and so was he. "He told me once that you were the best thing that ever happened to him, that you saved his life in every way that mattered." Zelda wiped her eyes and straightened her shoulders. "Then, I suppose I had better honor his memory by continuing to live the life we built together." That is what he would want. And she did. Zelda lived another 15 years, remaining active and engaged with the ranch and the community. She continued writing, publishing a memoir about her experiences that became popular throughout the West. She traveled to visit Sarah in town regularly and doted on her expanding brood of grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She attended church every Sunday and hosted family dinners and maintained the traditions she and Quincy had established. But every evening, she sat on the porch and watched the sunset, remembering the man who had loved her when she had nothing, who had given her everything that mattered, who had been her partner and her best friend and the love of her life. She talked to him in her heart, telling him about her day, asking his advice on difficult decisions, laughing at memories that still made her smile. Zelda Bradford died peacefully in her sleep in the summer of 1935, at the age of 77. She was buried beside Quincy in the cemetery on the hill, overlooking the ranch they had built together. At her funeral, attended by 4 generations of family and friends from across the state, Sarah read from her mother's memoir. "I walked away from money to find true love," Zelda had written. "My cowboy had nothing but love to offer. I thought that meant he had so little. I was wrong. He had everything. And in choosing him, in choosing love over comfort and security over freedom and authenticity over appearance, I found the richest life imaginable. We were not wealthy by society's standards, though we became comfortable over time. But we were rich in the ways that truly matter. Rich in love, in family, in purpose, in joy. I would not trade a single moment of our life together for all the mansions in Boston. That cowboy who had nothing gave me everything, and I will love him forever." The ranch continued to thrive under Thomas's stewardship and eventually passed to his children and grandchildren. The Bradford name became synonymous with integrity and quality in Colorado ranching circles. The scholarship fund Zelda had established grew substantially, helping hundreds of young women pursue their educational dreams. The music school Sarah founded continued to operate for decades, enriching the cultural life of the community. But perhaps the greatest legacy Quincy and Zelda left was simpler and more profound than any of those accomplishments. They proved that true love, the kind built on mutual respect and partnership and unwavering commitment, could overcome any obstacle. They showed that wealth measured in money was nothing compared to wealth measured in love and family and meaningful work. They demonstrated that courage, the courage to walk away from what is expected in pursuit of what is true, is always rewarded in the end. Their story became part of the mythology of the West, told and retold around dinner tables and campfires. The rich girl who gave up everything for love, the poor cowboy who offered nothing but his heart. The life they built together against all odds, proving that sometimes the best riches are the ones that cannot be counted or deposited in a bank. And in the quiet moments of twilight on the Bradford Ranch, when the prairie grass turns gold in the fading light and the wind whispers through the cottonwood trees, some swear you can still see them. 2 figures on the porch, holding hands, watching the sunset together. Still partners. Still in love. Still proof that when you choose love over money, when you choose authenticity over appearance, when you choose courage over comfort, you gain everything that truly matters. Their great-great-grandchildren still work the land, still raise cattle and horses, still uphold the values that Quincy and Zelda instilled in their family. They tell the story to their children, making sure each generation understands what their ancestors sacrificed and achieved. The big house still stands, lovingly maintained, filled with photographs and mementos from a life well lived. And sometimes, when the weight of modern life feels too heavy, when the pressure to pursue wealth and status over happiness and meaning becomes overwhelming, someone in the family will pause and remember Zelda's words. She walked away from money to find true love. The cowboy had nothing but love to offer, and it was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.